Grace Kelly's body count, if we're counting leading men she seduced, was impressive for a good Catholic girl from Philadelphia. Clark Gable, Gary Cooper, Bing Crosby, Ray Milland, William Holden, married men mostly, which made the affairs deliciously forbidden and emotionally devastating. She collected them like trophies, seeking in their approval the validation her cold father never gave, finding in their beds what she couldn't find in confession. Then she met Prince Rainier, who seemed safe, who offered marriage and legitimacy, who could make her respectable again. She said yes to the prince, and spent 26 years wishing she'd said yes to one of the others, the ones who actually loved her, who saw past the ice princess exterior to the passionate woman underneath. Grace Kelly died having never figured out that you can't marry your way into wholeness, that respectability is a poor substitute for passion, that sometimes the bad choices are the ones that feel like safety. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video for your support. Thank you for subscribing. The first man Grace Kelly needed to seduce was her father, and it was the one seduction she could never accomplish. John B. Kelly Sr. was a Philadelphia legend, a self-made millionaire who had risen from Irish immigrant poverty to build a bricklaying empire, an Olympic gold medalist in rowing who had been denied entry to England's Henley Royal Regatta because he'd once worked with his hands. That rejection had poisoned him, made him determined that his children would achieve the respectability his immigrant background denied him. He wanted sons who would win Olympic gold, daughters who would marry well and produce grandchildren. What he did not want was a daughter who wanted to act. Grace was born in 1929, the third of 4 Kelly children, arriving into a household that ran on competition and achievement. Her father worshipped athleticism, measuring his children's worth by their physical accomplishments. Her brother Kel was groomed to win Olympic rowing gold like his father. Her sister Peggy was the beautiful one, the social success. Grace was the one who didn't quite fit, too dramatic, too emotional, too prone to fantasy and make-believe. She was good at swimming, competed successfully, but her heart wasn't in it. Her heart was in the little plays she put on in the garage, the characters she became when no one was watching, the movies she saw and replayed in her imagination. John B. Kelly looked at his middle daughter and saw disappointment. She wasn't pretty enough. Her nose was too big, her jaw too strong, too much Kelly and not enough of her mother's Irish softness. She wasn't athletic enough. She could swim, but without the killer instinct he admired. And worst of all, she wanted to act, which to John Kelly was only slightly more respectable than prostitution. Actors were liars, pretenders, people who made money by being fake. Real people worked with their hands, built things, competed honestly. Grace's desire to act was a rejection of everything her father valued, and he made sure she knew it. Her mother, Margaret, was warmer but still distant, a former cover girl who had given up modeling to become a Kelly, who now ran the household with efficiency and little affection. The Kelly family wasn't demonstrative. No one said, "I love you." Physical affection was rare. Emotions were considered weaknesses to be controlled. Grace learned early that the way to earn attention was through achievement, and since she couldn't achieve athletically in ways that impressed her father, she would have to find another arena. At 14, Grace appeared in a play at the Old Academy Players in Philadelphia, and something happened on that stage that had never happened in her real life. She felt powerful. On stage, she could be anyone, not the daughter who disappointed her father, not the middle sister who didn't quite fit, but whoever the role required. She could be beautiful on stage through sheer force of performance. She could be loved on stage because the script demanded it. The applause at the end filled something in her that had been empty since birth, and Grace Kelly, at 14 years old, decided that acting was how she would finally make her father see her. But John Kelly refused to see. When Grace told him she wanted to attend the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York, he said no. Acting was not a career for a Kelly. She would go to college like her siblings, major in something practical, marry someone from a good family, and stop embarrassing him with theatrical nonsense. But Grace had inherited her father's stubbornness, even if she hadn't inherited his approval. She applied to the Academy anyway, was accepted, and at 18 years old, she moved to New York City to become an actress, not because her father gave permission, but because she had finally stopped waiting for it. New York, in 1947, was where good girls went to become women, and Grace Kelly was determined to shed the Philadelphia propriety that had made her invisible. She shared an apartment with other aspiring actresses, took classes at the Academy, modeled for extra money, and discovered something revolutionary. Men found her attractive. Not just attractive, desirable. The cool, blonde beauty that hadn't impressed Philadelphia boys made New York men stare. Her height, which had made her feel awkward among petite socialites, made photographers want to shoot her. The aristocratic features her father had dismissed as too strong made her memorable rather than merely pretty. She lost her virginity at 19 to an instructor at the Academy, an older married man who told her she had natural talent and needed private lessons. The private lessons took place in his apartment, and Grace went willingly, understanding even then that sex was another form of audition, another way to be seen and wanted and approved of. The affair was brief and educationally valuable. She learned that men liked the contrast between her cool exterior and the passion underneath, that her controlled public persona made her private abandon more exciting, that being a good Catholic girl who broke rules was more interesting than being a good Catholic girl who followed them. Her father's disapproval of her career choice made every rejection sting more deeply. When she didn't get a part, it confirmed what John Kelly had told her. She wasn't good enough, would never be good enough, was wasting everyone's time. When she did get a part, her father's response was silence or criticism. The role was too small, the production was amateur. Why was she bothering with this foolishness when she could be doing something respectable? Grace learned that she would never earn her father's approval through acting, but she kept trying anyway, because what else was there? At least in acting, she could be extraordinary. In Philadelphia, she was just disappointing. Her breakthrough came not on stage but on television in the early 1950s, when live TV drama was the training ground for serious actors. Grace appeared in dozens of productions, learning to hit marks, take direction, perform under pressure. Directors noticed her quality of controlled intensity. She could convey deep emotion while barely moving her face, could suggest entire inner worlds with a glance. The camera loved her ice blue eyes, the way they could shift from warm to cold in an instant, the mystery of what she was really thinking behind that composed exterior. In 1951, Grace got her first film role in 14 Hours, a small part, but enough to bring her to Hollywood's attention. She was 22 years old, still unknown, still trying to prove herself to a father who would never be impressed. When she returned to Philadelphia between roles, John Kelly would ask when she was going to give up this acting nonsense and find a husband. He had worked his entire life to give his children opportunities, and here was Grace wasting hers on make-believe. The message was clear. Until she achieved massive, undeniable success, her father would consider her a failure. So Grace set out to seduce success itself, and success in Hollywood meant leading men. Her first significant affair was with Gary Cooper during the filming of High Noon in 1951. Cooper was 50 years old, to Grace's 22, married to a socialite, father of a teenage daughter, and one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. He was also exactly the kind of man Grace's father would have respected. Successful, masculine, a real man who worked with horses and guns, even if it was just for movies. When Gary Cooper wanted Grace Kelly, it felt like validation of a sort she'd never experienced. If a man like that desired her, maybe she was desirable. If he chose to spend time with her instead of his wife, maybe she was worth choosing. The affair was conducted in that peculiarly Hollywood way. Everyone knew, but no one acknowledged it publicly. Cooper's wife looked the other way, as Hollywood wives learn to do. Grace felt guilty. She was a Catholic girl, after all, raised to believe that adultery was sin. But the guilt was abstract, theoretical. The concrete reality was that being in Gary Cooper's bed made her feel powerful, important, seen in ways she'd never been seen in Philadelphia. He was old enough to be her father, but treated her as an equal, a lover, a person whose thoughts and feelings mattered. It was intoxicating. But the affair ended when filming wrapped, because that's how Hollywood affairs worked. Cooper went back to his wife, and Grace went back to being a girl trying to become a star. She took the lesson with her. Love was temporary, but the work was permanent. The feelings didn't matter as much as the career, and the career was how she would finally force her father to see that she'd been right and he'd been wrong. Her next role was in Mogambo with Clark Gable, filming in Africa in 1953. Gable was 52 to Grace's 23, married, though separated, the legendary star of Gone with the Wind and everything masculine that Hollywood could produce. The affair was inevitable. Two beautiful people in Africa, far from home, with time and proximity and mutual attraction. Gable was charming in a way Cooper hadn't been, more playful, less tortured. He taught Grace how to drink properly, how to handle the press, how to be a movie star rather than just an actress. And in bed, he was generous and experienced, teaching her things that good Catholic girls weren't supposed to know but that movie stars needed to understand. Grace returned from Africa knowing she'd been good in Mogambo, that the camera had captured something special. She was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress, her first Oscar nomination, proof that she was more than just another blonde trying to make it in Hollywood. When she attended the ceremony, her father actually came to watch, sitting in the audience with an expression Grace couldn't quite read. She didn't win. Donna Reed took the Oscar for From Here to Eternity, but being nominated was enough to shift how her father looked at her. Not pride exactly, but something closer to acknowledgement. Maybe acting wasn't complete foolishness. Maybe Grace had been right after all. But acknowledgement isn't love, and Grace Kelly was still searching for something that felt like being chosen, being essential, being unable to be abandoned. The affairs continued. Ray Milland, during the filming of Dial M for Murder, another married man, this one actually in love with her enough to consider leaving his wife. Grace panicked when Milland's wife found out, when the affair threatened to become public scandal. She was still Grace Kelly from Philadelphia, still worried about reputation and respectability, still a good Catholic girl who went to confession and admitted her sins, even as she continued committing them. The affair with Milland ended messily, with hurt feelings and studio interventions, and Grace learning that passion was dangerous, that feelings complicated careers, that maybe she should be more careful about which married men she seduced. Enter Alfred Hitchcock, who would make Grace Kelly immortal, and who understood exactly what she was: ice covering fire, propriety masking danger, a good girl who wanted to be bad. Hitchcock cast her in Dial M for Murder in 1954, then Rear Window, then To Catch a Thief, each role exploring different facets of the cool blonde who might be murderous, manipulative, or simply mysterious. Hitchcock was obsessed with her in a way that was professional, but tinged with something darker. He controlled her on set, dictated her wardrobe, her hair, her makeup, essentially creating Grace Kelly as Ice Princess icon. Grace submitted to Hitchcock's control because that's what she'd been raised to do: defer to male authority, be the good girl who followed directions. But she also understood that Hitchcock was making her a star in ways her talent alone couldn't. Rear Window made her a household name. James Stewart, her co-star, was another older man, 46 to her 24, But this affair stayed professional. Stewart was smart enough to keep his distance, and besides, Grace was already involved with someone else. William Holden was 36 to Grace's 24 when they made the bridges at Toko-ri in 1954, and this affair felt different. Holden wasn't just attracted to Grace. He loved her, genuinely and deeply, in ways that scared her because they were real. He was married but separated, handsome and talented and self-destructive, an alcoholic fighting demons that Grace couldn't fix. They talked about getting married, about building a life together, and for a moment Grace thought maybe this was it, the real thing, the love that would last. But Holden told her he'd had a vasectomy years ago, couldn't give her children, and Grace realized with crushing clarity that she couldn't marry him. Not because she didn't love him, she did, but because she could already hear her father's voice. What kind of woman chooses a sterile alcoholic over respectability? What kind of Kelly throws away her future for a man who can't even give her children? Grace chose respectability over love, ending the affair with Holden, even though it hurt more than any of the others. He never quite got over her, and Grace spent the rest of her life wondering if she'd made the worst mistake of all, letting go of the one who actually loved her for someone who could give her what her father would approve of. In 1955, Grace Kelly won the Academy Award for Best Actress for The Country Girl, playing a dowdy wife of an alcoholic, the least glamorous role of her career, the one where she proved she was an actress and not just a beautiful face. She stood on that stage, holding her Oscar at 26 years old, having achieved everything she'd set out to prove to her father, and John B. Kelly actually smiled. It still wasn't the approval she'd been seeking. He still thought acting was beneath the Kelly family dignity. But at least now she was a successful actress, an Oscar winner, someone who had conquered Hollywood the way he'd conquered business and rowing. But success felt hollow. The affairs with married men had taught Grace that she was desirable, but not essential. These men wanted her, but wouldn't leave their wives for her. Her father's grudging approval taught her that no amount of achievement would make him love her the way she needed to be loved. And at 26, Grace was starting to understand that Hollywood had an expiration date for actresses, especially beautiful ones. How many more years of being the ice princess? How many more Hitchcock blondes before she aged out of the roles? How many more affairs with men who couldn't marry her before she ended up alone? She met Prince Rainier III of Monaco in May 1955 during a photo opportunity at the Cannes Film Festival. It was supposed to be publicity. A movie star meets a prince. Photographers capture the fairy tale. Everyone benefits. But Rainier, at 31, was actually looking for a wife. Monaco needed an heir, and he needed someone who could bring glamour and legitimacy to his tiny principality. Grace Kelly, Oscar winner, one of the most beautiful women in the world, would make an extraordinary princess. And Grace, tired of affairs that went nowhere, tired of her father's disapproval, tired of wondering how long her beauty and fame would last, looked at Rainier and saw safety. He wasn't exciting like Holden, or worldly like Cooper, or charming like Gable. Rainier was stiff, formal, shorter than Grace in heels, balding, controlling, and emotionally distant. But he was a prince, which was respectable. He wanted to marry her, which was commitment. He could give her children, which was her father's definition of success. Most importantly, marrying a prince was the ultimate achievement. It would prove to her father that she'd been extraordinary all along, that becoming an actress had led to something beyond his imagination, that Grace Kelly was worth choosing for something permanent. The courtship was brief and transactional. Rainier needed Grace to bring her fame and her Hollywood connections to Monaco. Grace needed Rainier to offer her an exit from Hollywood before Hollywood was done with her. There wasn't great passion. Friends noticed they seemed more like business partners than lovers. But there was mutual benefit, and for Grace, who had learned young that love was conditional, Mutual benefit seemed more reliable than passion. Her father approved. Of course he approved. His daughter was marrying a prince, which was about as respectable as achievement could get. John B. Kelly, who had been rejected by English aristocrats because he'd worked with his hands, would now have a son-in-law who was royalty. The fact that Grace was giving up her career at its peak, that she was marrying a man she barely knew, that she seemed more resigned than excited, these details didn't matter. She was going to be a princess, and that was the greatest possible validation that she'd been extraordinary all along. Grace's Hollywood friends were less enthusiastic. They'd seen her with Holden, seen her light up in ways she didn't light up talking about Rainier. They wondered if she was making a terrible mistake, choosing duty over passion, choosing her father's approval over her own happiness. But Grace insisted she was ready to give up acting, ready to be a wife and mother, ready for the stability that royalty offered. She was 26 years old and already exhausted from the performance of being Grace Kelly, the movie star. Maybe being Princess Grace would be easier, more real, something that didn't require constant auditions and affairs, and the fear of aging out of relevance. The wedding in April 1956 was called the Wedding of the Century. MGM paid for the ceremony as Grace's final film production, cameras capturing every moment for theatrical release. Grace wore a Helen Rose gown that cost thousands of dollars, walked down the aisle of Monaco Cathedral, married Prince Rainier III in front of 600 guests and 30 million television viewers worldwide. She looked beautiful and composed and perfect, the ice princess becoming an actual princess, the fairy tale ending that everyone wanted for her. But fairy tales are stories, and stories end. Real life continues, and real life in Monaco turned out to be very different from the fantasy Grace had imagined. Rainier wasn't a fairy tale prince. He was a man with serious control issues, jealous of his wife's fame, resentful that people came to Monaco to see Grace rather than him, determined to turn his movie star wife into a proper princess who knew her place. The rules were established immediately. Grace would not act again. She would not return to Hollywood for film roles. She would not maintain her American identity in ways that suggested divided loyalty. She was Princess Grace of Monaco now, and Monaco's princess existed to support her husband, produce heirs, and represent the principality with dignity. The woman who had been Grace Kelly, independent, ambitious, passionate, was supposed to disappear. Grace tried to disappear her. She got pregnant immediately, giving birth to Princess Caroline in 1957, then Prince Albert in 1958, then Princess Stephanie in 1965. She attended state functions, cut ribbons, smiled for cameras, played the role of princess with the same perfection she'd brought to her film roles. But this role had no end date, no rap party, no opportunity to become someone else. This was her life now, and slowly Grace Kelly suffocated under the weight of Princess Grace. Rainier was jealous and controlling in ways that revealed deep insecurity. When Grace received letters from her, former co-stars, he read them and made accusations. When she suggested returning to Hollywood for a small role, he forbade it absolutely. Princesses don't work. And Monaco's princess especially couldn't be seen doing something as common as acting. When Grace expressed any desire for independence, any wish to maintain some piece of her former identity, Rainier reminded her that she had made a choice, that she was his wife and Monaco's princess, and that came with obligations that didn't include being Grace Kelly anymore. She tried to find fulfillment in being a mother, and she did love her children genuinely. But motherhood wasn't enough to replace the satisfaction she'd gotten from acting, from being seen, from performing. She tried to find fulfillment in charitable work, becoming involved in various Monaco causes, but charity work as a princess meant appearing at events and shaking hands, not actual meaningful engagement. She tried to maintain connections with her Hollywood past, but Rainier made it clear that her loyalty had to be to Monaco first, and anything that suggested divided attention was threatening to him. By the 1960s, Grace was trapped. She couldn't return to acting, couldn't return to America permanently, couldn't even maintain the friendships and connections that had defined her. Hitchcock approached her about starring in Marnie in 1964, and Grace was desperate to say yes. Being back on a film set, being directed by Hitchcock again, being Grace Kelly, the actress, for even a few months, it felt like being offered water after years in a desert. But Rainier said no, and the people of Monaco said no, and the press said no, all of them reminding her that princesses don't act, that she'd made her choice, that she couldn't go back. She fell into depression, gained weight, drank more wine at state dinners than was probably advisable. She looked at her daughters and wondered if she was teaching them that women's dreams mattered less than men's demands, that marriage meant erasure, that choosing security over passion was the right choice even when it felt like dying slowly. She looked at photographs of herself from the 1950s, the cool blonde in Hitchcock films, the woman who'd had affairs with the biggest stars in Hollywood, the actress who'd won an Oscar, and she couldn't recognize herself anymore. Her relationship with Rainier deteriorated into polite distance, punctuated by his jealousy and control. He had affairs, which Grace knew about but couldn't acknowledge publicly. She fantasized about having her own affairs, about recapturing some of the passion she'd known with Holden, or the excitement she'd felt with Cooper, but she was Princess Grace now, watched constantly, photographed everywhere, imprisoned by her own fame in ways Hollywood had never managed. At least in Hollywood, she'd been free between roles. In Monaco, the role never ended. In the 1970s, Grace gave interviews where she spoke carefully about her life. Always positive, always composed, always the perfect princess. But occasionally, in unguarded moments, she would mention how much she missed acting, how she wished she'd made one more film, how sometimes she wondered what her life would have been if she'd chosen differently. Then she would catch herself, smile that composed smile, and say that of course she was happy, that being a princess and a mother was everything she'd wanted. But people who knew her saw the truth. Grace Kelly had traded Hollywood for a crown, and had been paying for it every day since. She had given up her identity, her career, her freedom, everything that had made her feel alive, for safety and respectability and her father's approval. And what she'd learned too late was that no amount of safety was worth losing yourself, that respectability was a poor substitute for fulfillment, that her father's approval, which she'd finally earned by becoming a princess, didn't actually make her happy because his approval had always been conditional, always dependent on her achieving what he valued rather than what she valued. Her father, John B. Kelly Sr., died in 1960, having finally approved of Grace, but never having truly seen her. He died proud that his daughter was a princess, satisfied that the Kelly family had achieved ultimate respectability, convinced that Grace had made the right choice. He never knew that his approval had cost Grace everything that mattered, that she'd sacrificed her true self to become what he wanted, that the princess he was proud of was really just a prison that Grace Kelly was serving a life sentence in. On September 13th, 1982, Grace was driving from the family's country home to Monaco with her 17-year-old daughter Stephanie. The road was winding, the car, a Rover 3500 that Grace drove herself, rare freedom in a life that offered little. Something happened on that mountain road. Grace said she felt dizzy. The car swerved. She lost control. The Rover went off the road, rolling down a 40-foot embankment, crashing into a cliff face. Stephanie survived with injuries. Grace died the next day from her injuries, though the official cause was a stroke that occurred either before or during the crash. She was 52 years old. She had been Princess Grace for 26 years, exactly half her life. The other half had been Grace Kelly, actress, lover, dreamer, the woman who'd had affairs with married men seeking approval, who'd won an Oscar seeking her father's love, who'd married a prince seeking safety. The world mourned Princess Grace with the same fairy tale language they'd used to celebrate her wedding. It was tragic, they said, that such a beautiful life had been cut short. But was it beautiful? Or was it a slow suffocation disguised by tiaras and protocol, a prison with better furniture than most prisons, a life sentence for the crime of choosing safety over passion? Grace's former lovers came to the funeral or sent condolences, these married men she'd loved who hadn't been able to save her from the choice she'd made. William Holden, who might have been the great love of her life if only she'd been brave enough to choose him, sent flowers. The Hollywood friends who'd tried to warn her that marrying Rainier was a mistake came and wept, not just for her death, but for the life she'd given up. Her children inherited her beauty and her pain. Caroline became a princess who would experience her own troubled marriages. Albert became a prince who struggled under the weight of succession. Stephanie, who had been in the car during the crash, carried trauma and guilt, spending years trying to understand what had happened on that mountain road, whether her mother had been trying to escape or had simply lost control. Prince Rainier mourned genuinely. He had loved Grace in his way, even if his way had been possessive and controlling and ultimately destructive. He never remarried, kept Grace's rooms exactly as she'd left them, spoke of her in interviews with genuine grief. But he never seemed to understand that his jealousy and control had helped kill Grace Kelly long before the car crash killed Princess Grace. The question that haunted those who knew her, was the crash truly an accident, or had Grace Kelly, at 52 years old, finally found a way out? Official reports said stroke, mechanical failure, loss of control on a dangerous road. But those who knew how unhappy she'd been, how trapped she'd felt, how desperately she'd wanted to escape the cage her life had become, wondered if perhaps Grace had simply stopped trying to hold on, stopped fighting to maintain control, let the car go over the cliff because dying free was better than living imprisoned. The truth died with Grace, as truths often do. What remained were the films, 11 perfect performances captured forever. Grace Kelly before she became Princess Grace, the actress in her prime. Watching Rear Window or To Catch a Thief, you can see the woman she was before Monaco, the cool blonde hiding fire, the performer who commanded the screen, the Grace Kelly who seduced leading men and won Oscars and made her father finally see her. The Catholic guilt followed Grace to her grave. She'd committed adultery with married men, broken commandments, sinned repeatedly while continuing to attend Mass and take communion. Did she confess those sins? Did she ask for absolution? Did she die believing she would be judged for her affairs? Or did she understand that the real sin wasn't sleeping with married men, but marrying a prince she didn't love because it was safer than choosing passion? The affairs with married men weren't really about sex. They were about seeking approval from father figures, trying to fill the hole her actual father had created by withholding love and validation. Grace Kelly seduced successful older men because in their beds, for those brief hours, she felt chosen, essential, valuable, in ways her father had never made her feel. Each affair was another audition for love, and when each affair ended, it confirmed what she'd always suspected. She wasn't enough, would never be enough, could never be loved permanently. Marrying Rainier was supposed to solve that. Permanent commitment, legal bond, a man who had chosen her officially and publicly and forever. But what Grace learned too late was that you can legally bind someone without actually loving them, that marriage can be another kind of cage, that choosing safety over passion doesn't make you safe, it just makes you numb. In the end, Grace Kelly's greatest performance wasn't on screen. It was the 26 years she spent convincing the world that she was happy as Princess Grace. She maintained that performance until the day she died, elegant and composed and perfect, the ice princess who never cracked. But underneath the performance, there was still Grace Kelly, The girl from Philadelphia who'd wanted her father to love her. The actress who'd felt alive on screen. The woman who'd had affairs with married men, seeking validation that never quite came. The tragedy isn't that Grace Kelly died at 52. The tragedy is that Grace Kelly died at 26 when she married Rainier and spent the next 26 years as Princess Grace, a role she couldn't escape, a performance she couldn't end, a choice she couldn't undo. The car crash was just the moment when her body caught up with what her soul had known for years. She'd been dead for a long time, and Monaco was just a very beautiful coffin. Her legacy is complicated, adored as Princess Grace, immortalized as the Hitchcock blonde, remembered as Hollywood royalty who became actual royalty. But the real Grace Kelly, the passionate woman who had affairs seeking love, the ambitious actress who wanted her father's approval, the person underneath all the performances, that woman was lost somewhere between Hollywood and Monaco, between Grace Kelly and Princess Grace, between who she was and who everyone needed her to be. On her grave in Monaco, tourists leave flowers and take photographs, mourning a princess they never knew. But the real mourning should be for Grace Kelly, the actress who gave up everything for a crown that turned out to be a cage, who spent half her life seeking approval from men who couldn't give it, and the other half trapped in a marriage that suffocated her, who died on a mountain road possibly seeking the only freedom that remained. She was the Catholic girl who loved too many men and married the wrong one. But the wrongness wasn't in the affairs, or the ambition, or the desire for approval. The wrongness was in believing that safety mattered more than passion, that respectability mattered more than fulfillment, that her father's approval was worth trading her entire self to achieve. Grace Kelly learned that lesson too late, paid for it with 26 years of slow suffocation, and took the truth with her when her car went over that cliff. The world remembers her as an icon, but icons aren't people. They're images, performances, myths we tell ourselves about beauty and grace and fairy tales. The person behind the icon, the woman who struggled and suffered and made terrible choices seeking love that never quite came, that woman deserves to be remembered too, not for how perfect she looked, but for how human she was, how flawed, how desperately she tried to be enough for everyone while never being enough for herself. Grace Kelly, 1929-1982, actress, princess, icon. But before all of that, underneath all of that, always, a girl trying to earn her father's love, a woman trying to be chosen, a person who gave up everything for safety and discovered too late that the safest choice is often the most dangerous one of all.